The envelope sat on my breakfast table like a coiled snake, cream-colored and innocent, but I knew better. 62 years on this earth, 25 of them spent behind a judge's bench, had taught me to recognize danger, even when it wore a polite face. My coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I hadn't moved. I couldn't, because the letter had read Harmony Hills Senior Living Community, and I hadn't requested any information from them. My hands, the same hands that had signed hundreds of verdicts and held my husband's as he took his last breath 8 months ago, trembled as I opened it. The brochure inside showed smiling elderly faces, manicured gardens, and words like comprehensive care, memory support, and peace of mind for families. Families, not residents. Families. I heard footsteps on the stairs, Marcus's confident stride, the one he'd been perfecting since the funeral, trying to fill his father's shoes with feet that had never learned to walk in them. My son, my firstborn, the boy I'd nursed through asthma attacks and driven to basketball practice, who was now measuring my coffin while I was still breathing. "Morning, Mom," he said, appearing in the doorway in one of those expensive suits he couldn't quite afford on his salary. Vanessa was behind him, perfectly composed, as always, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk about some arrangements." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger in his eyes. It wasn't even greed. Though Lord knows there was plenty of that swimming in those pupils that shared my late husband's color, but none of his character. No, what I saw was certainty. The absolute conviction that I was already gone, already buried beside Charles, just a formality waiting to be processed. "Arrangements," I repeated, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening beneath my ribs. My judge's voice, the one that had made grown men confess to things they'd sworn they'd never done. "What kind of arrangements?" Vanessa moved forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood Charles and I had chosen together 30 years ago. "We've been thinking," she said, and I noticed she said we, as if she'd been born a Carter. As if she'd earned the name through something other than a wedding certificate and ambition. "This house is so big for one person, so many stairs, so much responsibility." Her eyes drifted to the senior living brochure like it had appeared by magic. "We only want what's best for you. What's best for me." The same words every oppressor has used since the beginning of time, dressed up as concern while reaching for your throat. I folded my hands on the table, silver braids falling across my shoulders, and I smiled, not a big smile, just enough to show teeth. "How thoughtful," I said. "Tell me, Marcus, did you practice this conversation? Rehearse it with your wife while planning how to spend my money?" The room went silent except for the old grandfather clock Charles's mother had given us, ticking away seconds like a countdown. My son's face shifted through emotions too fast to track, but Vanessa's never changed. She was better at this than he was, more patient, more dangerous. "We should discuss this when you're calmer," Marcus said. And there it was, the implication that I was irrational, unstable, incompetent. The first brick in a wall they'd been building around me since the funeral flowers had wilted. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd forgotten who I was before I became their mother, their obstacle, their problem to solve. They'd forgotten that I'd spent a quarter-century watching people lie, scheme, and justify their way into prison cells, and I'd learned every single one of their tricks. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I love knowing where my story is reaching. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare truly began. The thing about grief that nobody tells you is how loud the silence becomes. 3 months had passed since I'd watched them lower Charles into red Georgia clay. 3 months since I'd stood in my black dress accepting condolences from people who knew my husband as a business titan but never knew that he sang off-key in the shower or that he cried during every Pixar movie. 3 months since my world had split cleanly into before and after, and I was still trying to figure out which version of myself I was supposed to be now. The house felt different without him. Our home in Buckhead, this sprawling monument to 35 years of building something together, had become a mausoleum. Every room echoed with his absence. His reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. His cologne still lingered in his closet. I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee mugs out in the morning, my muscle memory refusing to accept what my mind already knew. I'd tried to maintain routines, wake at 6, coffee on the terrace overlooking the garden Charles had insisted on planting himself, despite having a landscaping crew, review the day's agenda. But what agenda was there now? I'd retired from the bench 2 years ago, planning to travel with Charles. To finally take that trip to Ghana we'd been promising ourselves since our honeymoon. Now those brochures sat in a drawer, destinations that had died with him. The Carter Holdings board meetings continued without pause. Charles had built an empire that didn't stop for something as inconsequential as its founder's death, but I'd attended the last three, sitting in the chair that had been his, trying to understand spreadsheets and development projects and investment portfolios that Charles had always handled. He'd been the architect, I'd been the moral compass. Now I was supposed to be both, and I was drowning. That's when Marcus suggested he and Vanessa move in. Just temporarily. "Mom," he'd said, standing in this same kitchen where I now sat holding that damned senior living brochure, "you shouldn't be alone right now. Dad would have wanted us to look after you. Charles would have wanted no such thing." My husband had loved our son with the fierce protection of a father, but he'd never been blind to Marcus's weaknesses. "He's got good bones," Charles used to say, "but he's still learning to stand on them." It was the kindest way to say that our 35-year-old son still needed propping up, still made impulsive decisions, still measured his worth by the size of his office rather than the quality of his character. But I was tired. God, I was so tired. Tired of eating dinner alone. Tired of this house that seemed to grow larger and emptier every day. Tired of being strong when all I wanted was to curl up in Charles's favorite armchair and cease existing for a while. So, I said yes. They arrived on a Saturday in late spring, when the magnolias were blooming and Atlanta was that particular shade of green that makes you believe in new beginnings. Marcus carried boxes like he was moving mountains, making a show of his helpfulness. Vanessa directed everything with the precision of a general deploying troops, deciding which guest room they'd take, the largest one, naturally, where their things would go everywhere, how we'd reorganize the kitchen her way. "This will be good," Marcus kept saying, squeezing my shoulder with those big hands that reminded me so much of his father's, except Charles's hands had built things while Marcus's just grasped at them. "We're family. We take care of each other." Naomi called that evening from Howard University, my baby girl, 22 and sharp as a fresh blade, pursuing law like her mother, like her grandmother before me, like every Carter woman who'd decided justice was worth fighting for. "Mama, are you sure about this?" Her voice carried that particular frequency of concern that only daughters can achieve. "Marcus living there, with Vanessa." "It's fine, baby," I'd assured her, standing in my bedroom, one of the few rooms that still felt like mine. "Your brother wants to help. Marcus wants a lot of things," Naomi said, and I could picture her face, that combination of my bone structure and Charles's eyes that made her look like a perfect blend of our best parts. "I'm not sure helping you is on the list. Don't speak about your brother that way. I'm speaking about who he is, not who we wish he was." A pause. "Daddy saw it too. That's why he left the company to you." That was the sword hanging over everything, wasn't it? Charles's will, 3 weeks before he died, when he knew the cancer was winning, when he was still lucid enough to make final decisions, he'd changed everything. Not just the will, but the corporate structure, the trusts, the foundations. He'd placed it all in my hands. Made me the controlling shareholder of Carter Holdings, the executor of his estate, the guardian of everything he'd built. Marcus had received a generous trust fund and his position as VP of Development. Naomi had gotten her education fully funded and a trust that would activate when she turned 25. But the kingdom itself, the real power, Charles had given to me. "Your judgment has never failed us," he'd whispered from his hospital bed, his hand in mine, his body already more gone than present. "Marcus isn't ready. Maybe he'll never be. But you'll know what to do. You always do." At the funeral, Marcus had stood beside me like the dutiful son, accepting condolences, his face arranged in appropriate grief. But I'd seen him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, and the expression wasn't sorrow. It was assessment, calculation, the look of a man doing math in his head, trying to figure out how long he'd have to wait. The first week of their occupancy was fine, pleasant, even. Marcus went to the office early, came home late, kissed my cheek and asked about my day. Vanessa cooked elaborate dinners. She was an exceptional cook. I had to give her that tanned we'd eat together in the formal dining room, using the china Charles and I had received as wedding gifts, making small talk about nothing consequential, but small changes started appearing. A file from Charles's study moved to a different shelf. Mail that I hadn't opened yet, already sorted on my desk. The home computer logged into accounts I didn't remember. Nothing I could point to definitively. Nothing I could accuse them of without sounding paranoid. But enough to make my judicial instincts prickle with warning. Then came the visits from people I didn't know. Business associates of Marcus's, he said, just stopping by briefly. They'd gather in Charles's study. I'd started thinking of it as Charles's study again, not my study, because I was slowly being edited out of my own home, and speak in low voices about developments and opportunities and growth potential. What are these meetings about? I asked one evening after the third stranger had left. Business, Mom, company stuff. Don't worry about it. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've got enough on your plate. Let me handle the day-to-day operations. Your father left me in charge of operations. Sure, but you're still grieving, still adjusting. I'm just trying to lighten your load. He squeezed my shoulder again, that gesture that was becoming less comfort and more condescension. You trust me, don't you? What could I say? He was my son, my firstborn, the baby I'd rocked through colic and night terrors, the toddler I'd taught to read, the teenager I'd bailed out of more stupid decisions than I could count. Of course, I trusted him, didn't I? Vanessa appeared in the doorway, 2 glasses of wine in her hands. She'd started doing that, bringing me wine in the evenings, insisting I needed to relax. Here, Mom. She never called me by my name anymore. Always Mom, like she was claiming membership in a club she'd bought her way into. A nice Bordeaux, Charles's favorite. I took the glass, because refusing felt churlish. She watched me sip it with those calculating eyes that never quite smiled even when her mouth did. You know, she said, settling onto the couch beside me, closer than I would have chosen. I was thinking we should update some things around here, modernize a bit. This house is beautiful, but it's very traditional. My husband chose everything in this house. Exactly. She patted my hand. And I'm sure every corner reminds you of him. Maybe that's not healthy. Maybe we need to help you move forward. Move forward. Move on. Let go. These phrases started appearing with increasing frequency, delivered with concern, wrapped in care, but feeling more and more like erasure. They wanted me to forget Charles, to stop being the woman who'd built this life with him, to become someone smaller, quieter, more manageable. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Charles's pillow beside me still holding the ghost of his shape. The house made noises it had never made before, footsteps in the hallway at odd hours, doors opening and closing, whispered conversations that stopped when I appeared. I thought about my years on the bench, about the patterns I'd learned to recognize, how abuse doesn't start with violence. It starts with isolation, with small erosions of autonomy disguised as help, with questions about your competence wrapped in concern for your well-being. My phone buzzed. A text from Naomi. How's it going with Marcus? I stared at it for a long time before responding. Fine, but it wasn't fine. And as I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning, that my son hadn't moved in to take care of me. He'd moved in to take over. The first thing that went missing was my wedding ring. Not the engagement ring. Not the engagement ring. I still wore that. The modest diamond Charles had saved 3 months' salary to buy, when we were young and stupid and convinced love could conquer financial insecurity. But the wedding band, the simple gold circle, I'd taken off before bed and placed in the ceramic dish on my nightstand every night for 35 years, vanished. I'd stood in my bedroom that Tuesday morning, staring at the empty dish like it might reveal its secrets, my heart hammering against my ribs. I checked the floor, the bed sheets, underneath the furniture. Nothing. That ring had been part of my body for longer than my children had been alive, and now it was just gone. Maybe you put it somewhere else, Vanessa suggested when I mentioned it at breakfast, her voice dripping with that particular brand of sympathy that feels more like pity. These things happen, Mom, especially when we're stressed. Memory gets fuzzy. Memory gets fuzzy. As if I was some confused old woman who couldn't remember where she'd put things, rather than a former federal judge who'd memorized 1,000-page case files and recited legal precedents from memory. I didn't put it anywhere else, I said, keeping my voice level. I put it in the same place I've put it every night since 1988. Marcus looked up from his phone. I'm sure it'll turn up. Probably just fell behind the nightstand or something. But I'd already checked behind the nightstand. I'd checked everywhere, and the sick feeling in my stomach told me it wouldn't turn up because someone had wanted it gone. Maybe to sell, maybe just to destabilize me, to make me question myself. The ring was just the beginning. Files from Charles's study started appearing in different locations. Legal documents I'd been reviewing would shift positions on my desk. the thick folder containing his business succession plans papers I'd been meticulously studying, trying to understand the empire I'd inherited moved from the left side of my desk to the right. Small changes, barely noticeable, but I'd spent 25 years noticing details that everyone else overlooked. I started marking the positions of things, a pen placed at a specific angle, a folder aligned precisely with the desk edge. Every morning, I'd find them shifted. Someone was going through my things, and they were getting bolder about it. The phone calls started next. My cell would ring at odd hours, 2 in the morning, 4:30, 6:15, from numbers I didn't recognize. When I answered, there'd be silence, or sometimes heavy breathing, or once, a woman's laugh before the line went dead. I tried calling back. Disconnected numbers, every single time. Probably spam calls, Marcus said when I mentioned it. You know how it is these days. Everyone's trying to scam seniors. Seniors, he'd started using that word, not older people or retirees. Seniors, like I was one step from a nursing home, from incompetence, from needing someone to cut my meat and tie my shoes. I caught Vanessa in Charles's study one afternoon, standing at his desk with her hand on a locked drawer. She startled when I appeared, her composure slipping for just a second before that smooth mask fell back into place. I was just looking for a pen, she said. There are pens on top of the desk. Right, of course. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. This room is so Charles, isn't it? Maybe we should convert it, make it into something more current. A yoga studio, perhaps. I've heard meditation is excellent for grief. This room stays exactly as it is. Of course, Mom. That word again. Proprietorial and presumptuous. I just think holding on to the past so tightly isn't healthy. Charles would want you to move forward. Everyone seemed to know what Charles would have wanted except the woman who'd shared his bed for 35 years. Suddenly, everyone was an expert on my dead husband's wishes, and coincidentally, all those wishes involved me stepping aside, giving up, letting go. I started locking my bedroom door at night, started keeping my important documents in a safe that only I knew the combination to, started watching Marcus and Vanessa the way I used to watch defendants in my courtroom looking for the tells, the inconsistencies, the moments when the mask slipped. Marcus had started dressing like his father, same style suits, same tie clips, same cologne. He'd even started sitting in Charles's chair at the dinner table. A subtle usurpation that made my jaw clench every time I saw it. He'd taken to holding forth at meals about business decisions, company strategy, market opportunities, speaking with an authority he hadn't earned, in a voice that grew louder when I questioned him. The West Side development is a gold mine. Mom, Dad was too conservative in his approach. We need to leverage the opportunity before your father wasn't conservative. He was careful. There's a difference, sure, but times change. The market's different now. We can't run a modern company with old school thinking. Old school thinking, as if prudence and ethics were outdated concepts. As if Charles's integrity was a weakness rather than the foundation of everything we'd built. Vanessa would place her hand on Marcus's arm during these exchanges, a gentle restraint that said more than words. Not yet. Patience. Let her hang herself with her own resistance. I noticed other things too. Bills arriving for credit cards I hadn't opened, charges appearing on existing accounts for purchases I hadn't made. When I called the credit card company, they told me the cards had been ordered 3 weeks ago, sent to this address, activated and used. Must be fraud, the customer service representative said. We'll cancel them and investigate. But I knew it wasn't random fraud. Someone in this house had access to my information, my social security number, my documentation. Someone was slowly, methodically taking pieces of my identity and wearing them like a costume. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything, dates, times, incidents, conversations, my judicial training kicking in, building a case file against my own family. Every lawyer knows you need evidence, documentation, proof. Accusations without evidence are just paranoia, and I refused to be dismissed as a paranoid old woman. The journal I kept hidden. The first thing that went missing was my wedding ring. Not the engagement ring. Not the engagement ring, I still wore that. The modest diamond Charles had saved 3 months' salary to buy, when we were young and stupid and convinced love could conquer financial insecurity. But the wedding band, the simple gold circle, I'd taken off before bed and placed in the ceramic dish on my nightstand every night for 35 years, vanished. I'd stood in my bedroom that Tuesday morning, staring at the empty dish like it might reveal its secrets, my heart hammering against my ribs. I checked the floor, the bed sheets, underneath the furniture. Nothing. That ring had been part of my body for longer than my children had been alive, and now it was just ... gone. Maybe you put it somewhere else, Vanessa suggested when I mentioned it at breakfast, her voice dripping with that particular brand of sympathy that feels more like pity. These things happen, Mom, especially when we're stressed. Memory gets fuzzy. As if I was some confused old woman who couldn't remember where she'd put things, rather than a former federal judge who'd memorized 1,000-page case files and recited legal precedents from memory. I didn't put it anywhere else, I said, keeping my voice level. I put it in the same place I've put it every night since 1988. Marcus looked up from his phone. I'm sure it'll turn up. Probably just fell behind the nightstand or something. But I'd already checked behind the nightstand. I'd checked everywhere, and the sick feeling in my stomach told me it wouldn't turn up because someone had wanted it gone. Maybe to sell, maybe just to destabilize me, to make me question myself. The ring was just the beginning. Files from Charles's study started appearing in different locations. Legal documents I'd been reviewing would shift positions on my desk. The thick folder containing his business succession plans papers I'd been meticulously studying, trying to understand the empire I'd inherited, moved from the left side of my desk to the right. Small changes, barely noticeable, but I'd spent 25 years noticing details that everyone else overlooked. I started marking the positions of things, a pen placed at a specific angle, a folder aligned precisely with the desk edge. Every morning, I'd find them shifted. Someone was going through my things, and they were getting bolder about it. The phone calls started next. My cell would ring at odd hours, 2 in the morning, 4:30, 6:15, from numbers I didn't recognize. When I answered, there'd be silence, or sometimes heavy breathing, or once, a woman's laugh before the line went dead. I tried calling back. Disconnected numbers, every single time. Probably spam calls, Marcus said when I mentioned it. You know how it is these days. Everyone's trying to scam seniors. Seniors, he'd started using that word, not older people or retirees. Seniors, like I was one step from a nursing home, from incompetence, from needing someone to cut my meat and tie my shoes. I caught Vanessa in Charles's study one afternoon, standing at his desk with her hand on a locked drawer. She startled when I appeared, her composure slipping for just a second before that smooth mask fell back into place. I was just looking for a pen, she said. There are pens on top of the desk. Right, of course. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. This room is so Charles, isn't it? Maybe we should convert it, make it into something more ... current. A yoga studio, perhaps. I've heard meditation is excellent for grief. This room stays I told him he'd need documented proof of incompetence from multiple medical professionals, and even then, I'd fight it with every resource at my disposal. Leonard's voice hardened. Evelyn, you're one of the sharpest legal minds I've ever known. What's going on? I told him everything. The missing ring, the shifted documents, the locked accounts, the late-night calls, the credit cards, the subtle erosions of my autonomy disguised as concern. As I spoke, I heard myself laying out a case the way I'd done 1,000 times from the bench, marshalling facts, building an argument, constructing a narrative of abuse. Jesus, Leonard breathed when I finished. Evelyn, this is you, need to act now. If Marcus is building a competency case, every strange behavior, every confused moment, every incident will be used against you. They're constructing a narrative. I know, I've seen it before, just usually from the bench, not from inside my own home. What do you want to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What did I want? To confront them, to throw them out, to pretend this wasn't happening, and hope it got better? No. None of those options. I'd spent my career watching predators circle the weak, and I'd learned one universal truth. You don't negotiate with people who want to devour you. You don't reason with them or appeal to their better nature. You outmaneuver them. I need you to do something for me, I said. And Leonard, no one can know. Not your partners, not your secretary, not your wife, no one. I'm listening. I laid out what I needed. As I spoke, I felt something shift inside me. The grief-stricken widow was receding. The uncertain, destabilized woman they'd been carefully constructing was dissolving. In her place, the judge was returning. The woman who'd sent criminals to prison, who'd dismantled arguments, who'd looked into the eyes of liars and made them blink first. Marcus and Vanessa thought they were hunting a wounded animal. They were about to discover they'd cornered a predator. Sleep had become a rare commodity. I'd lie in bed, door locked, listening to the house settle and creak, trying to distinguish between normal sounds and footsteps outside my room. My mind would race through scenarios, legal strategies, escape routes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was planning an escape from my own home, the sanctuary Charles and I had built together, now transformed into a prison with my son as the warden. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks after my conversation with Leonard, when everything crystallized into terrible clarity. I'd gone to bed early, claiming a headache which wasn't entirely a lie. The tension of performing normalcy while watching my life be dismantled was exhausting. But sleep wouldn't come. Around 11, I heard voices drifting up from downstairs. Marcus and Vanessa, their tones low but urgent. The kind of conversation people have when they think they're alone. I should have stayed in bed, should have pulled the pillow over my head and pretended ignorance. But a quarter-century of judicial instinct doesn't just evaporate because you've retired. I'd learned to trust that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, that whisper that said evidence is being created right now, and you need to hear it. I eased out of bed, grateful for the thick carpet Charles had insisted on. Our old bones will thank us, he'd joked, never knowing he wouldn't live long enough for his bones to get truly old. The hallway was dark, except for the ambient light from the street lamps filtering through the windows. I moved slowly, carefully, placing each foot with the precision of someone who'd learned that even floorboards can betray you. The voices grew clearer as I reached the top of the stairs. They were in the study, Charles's study, though I'd stopped calling it that even in my own mind, because watching Marcus claim it had been too painful. The door was slightly ajar, a wedge of light cutting across the hallway floor. Can't wait much longer, Marcus was saying. The board meeting is in 6 weeks. If we don't have control by then, we will. Vanessa's voice, cool and confident. She's already showing signs. Did you see her at dinner? Confused about what day it was, asking if we'd already eaten when we were literally sitting down to eat. My blood went cold. I hadn't been confused. I'd asked if they'd already started eating because I'd been 5 minutes late coming down and Marcus had his fork halfway to his mouth. But apparently, that innocent question had been catalogued, twisted, added to whatever dossier they were building. But is it enough? Marcus sounded anxious, uncertain. Even in his betrayal, he was still my son, still needing reassurance, still looking for someone else to tell him he was doing the right thing. It's enough when combined with everything else, the credit cards she claimed she didn't open even, though her signature is on the applications, the bills she forgets to pay until we remind her, the appointments she misses. We're the ones hiding her mail and changing her calendar. Marcus protested, and for one brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe he had a conscience after all. Maybe there was still a part of my son who knew this was wrong. Yes, and Vanessa's voice sharpened. Do you want this or not? Because if you're going to get squeamish now, after everything we've done, I want it. God knows I've earned it. Dad ran that company for 40 years and never thought I was good enough. Left everything to her, like I'm some incompetent child. The bitterness in his voice was acid. She doesn't know anything about the business. She's a judge, was a judge. She spent her whole life in courtrooms while Dad built an empire. And now she gets to play CEO because what? She married him. She won't be playing anything much longer. Vanessa's voice softened, became almost soothing. Dr. Whitmore will testify to her declining mental state. We've been feeding him information for weeks, the confusion, the memory lapses, the paranoia. Dr. Whitmore, my physician for 15 years, the man who'd treated my hypertension and monitored my cholesterol and held my hand when Charles died. He was in on this. Are you sure he'll do it? Marcus asked. He's already worried about her. I mentioned how she's been acting strange, and he immediately suggested a cognitive assessment. We just need to get her to fail it. How do we do that? The sleeping pills I've been putting in her evening tea should help. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make her foggy, disoriented, combined with the stress she's under, the grief, the isolation. Vanessa paused, and I could picture her smile, sharp and satisfied. People see what they expect to see, and everyone expects a 62-year-old widow to fall apart. I gripped the banister so hard my knuckles ached. Sleeping pills. In my tea, the evening ritual Vanessa had established. You need to relax. Mom, let me make you something soothing. The grogginess I'd been experiencing, the difficulty concentrating, the way mornings felt like swimming through fog, not grief, not age. Poison, administered nightly with a smile. And then what? Marcus asked. Even with a cognitive assessment, even with Dr. Whitmore's testimony, then we file for conservatorship. Leonard will fight it. but he's one lawyer. We'll have medical experts, documented incidents, concerned family members testifying about her decline. The court will have to act. Vanessa's voice took on a lecturing tone, like she was explaining something to a slow student. Your mother spent her whole career believing in the system, trusting the law. That's going to be her downfall. She expects justice, expects fairness. She thinks her competence is but the law doesn't care about what's true. It cares about what can be proven. And we're building one hell of a proof. She's still sharp though. Today she caught that discrepancy in the West Side development numbers, asked questions which is why we need to move faster, get her declared incompetent before she realizes what's happening. Once we have conservatorship, we control everything, her assets, her shares in Carter Holdings, her decisions, we can even decide where she lives. Silence. Then Marcus, quietly, you mean the nursing home? I mean wherever we decide is best for her care. Vanessa's voice dripped false compassion. And let's be honest, she's too old to manage that big house anyway. So many stairs. So much responsibility. She'd be happier somewhere with full-time care, more appropriate for someone in her condition. Her condition, Marcus repeated, testing out the phrase, right? Sleep had become a rare commodity. I'd lie in bed, door locked, listening to the house settle and creak, trying to distinguish between normal sounds and footsteps outside my room. My mind would race through scenarios, legal strategies, escape routes. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was planning an escape from my own home, the sanctuary Charles and I had built together, now transformed into a prison with my son as the warden. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks after my conversation with Leonard, when everything crystallized into terrible clarity. I'd gone to bed early, claiming a headache which wasn't entirely a lie. The tension of performing normalcy while watching my life be dismantled was exhausting. But sleep wouldn't come. Around 11, I heard voices drifting up from downstairs. Marcus and Vanessa, their tones low but urgent. The kind of conversation people have when they think they're alone. I should have stayed in bed, should have pulled the pillow over my head and pretended ignorance. But a quarter-century of judicial instinct doesn't just evaporate because you've retired. I'd learned to trust that prickling sensation at the back of my neck, that whisper that said evidence is being created right now, and you need to hear it. I eased out of bed, grateful for the thick carpet Charles had insisted on. Our old bones will thank us, he'd joked, never knowing he wouldn't live long enough for his bones to get truly old. The hallway was dark, except for the ambient light from the street lamps filtering through the windows. I moved slowly, carefully, placing each foot with the precision of someone who'd learned that even floorboards can betray you. The voices grew clearer as I reached the top of the stairs. They were in the study, Charles's study, though I'd stopped calling it that even in my own mind, because watching Marcus claim it had been too painful. The door was slightly ajar, a wedge of light cutting across the hallway floor. Can't wait much longer, Marcus was saying. The board meeting is in 6 weeks. If we don't have control by then, we will. Vanessa's voice, cool and confident. She's already showing signs. Did you see her at dinner? Confused about what day it was, asking if we'd already eaten when we were literally sitting down to eat. My blood went cold. I hadn't been confused. I'd asked if they'd already started eating because I'd been 5 minutes late coming down and Marcus had his fork halfway to his mouth. But apparently, that innocent question had been catalogued, twisted, added to whatever dossier they were building. But is it enough? Marcus sounded anxious, uncertain. Even in his betrayal, he was still my son, still needing reassurance, still looking for someone else to tell him he was doing the right thing. It's enough when combined with everything else, the credit cards she claimed she didn't open even, though her signature is on the applications, the bills she forgets to pay until we remind her, the appointments she misses. We're the ones hiding her mail and changing her calendar. Marcus protested, and for one brief, foolish moment, I thought maybe he had a conscience after all. Maybe there was still a part of my son who knew this was wrong. Yes, and Vanessa's voice sharpened. Do you want this or not? Because if you're going to get squeamish now, after everything we've done, I want it. But they'd made one critical error. They'd forgotten that I'd spent a quarter-century in federal court, watching people try to game the system, manipulate the law, use legal mechanisms as weapons. I'd seen every trick, every scheme, every attempt to pervert justice into a tool for oppression, and I'd learn from all of them. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Leonard. Tonight, I'd document everything I'd heard, writing it down with the precision of someone who knew that evidence needed to be airtight, unimpeachable, documented to the minute. I looked at Charles's photo on the nightstand taken at Naomi's college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. I know what to do, I whispered to him. Just like you said, I know what to do. The woman they'd been drugging, the confused widow they'd been constructing, the incompetent old woman they'd planned to warehouse, she was gone. In her place stood Judge Evelyn Carter, and court was about to be in session. Leonard Morrison's office sat in a restored brownstone in downtown Atlanta, the kind of place that spoke of old money and older principles. I'd been here dozens of times over the years, closing on the house, setting up trusts for the children, reviewing Charles's business contracts, but I'd never arrived the way I did that Friday morning, taking an Uber instead of my own car, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, checking over my shoulder like a fugitive. Because that's what I was becoming, wasn't it? A fugitive in my own life. Leonard was waiting when I arrived, his secretary conspicuously absent. He locked the door behind me, and the click of that deadbolt echoed louder than it should have. Coffee, he offered, but his hands were already shaking as he poured. Leonard was 73, silver-haired and distinguished, a man who'd argued before the Supreme Court and never blinked. Seeing him nervous made everything more real. "Tell me," he said, once we were seated, his desk between us like a barrier against the insanity of what we were about to discuss. I told him everything: the overheard conversation, the sleeping pills, Dr. Whitmore's complicity, the timeline they'd established. As I spoke, Leonard's face shifted from concern to horror to something harder, sharper, the expression of a lawyer preparing for war. "Christ, Evelyn." He set down his coffee cup with enough force to rattle the saucer. "This is beyond estate manipulation. This is conspiracy, fraud, possibly even attempted kidnapping, depending on how we frame the nursing home angle. I know what it is. What I need to know is what we can do about it." Leonard pulled out a legal pad, that instinctive gesture every lawyer makes when reality becomes too complex to hold in memory alone. "First, you need to fire Dr. Whitmore immediately. Get a new physician, someone they don't have access to. Second, we document everything, I mean everything. That conversation you overheard, we need to get it in writing with timestamps, locations, exact quotes. Third," he paused, his pen hovering over paper. "Third, we need to consider whether you want to fight them or outmaneuver them. What's the difference? Fighting means we expose this now, file for restraining orders, press charges if we can make them stick. Drag this through court where it gets ugly and public and permanent. Your son goes from wayward to criminal. Your family becomes Atlanta gossip. Everything Charles built gets tainted by scandal." He looked at me directly. "That's one option. It's righteous. It's also brutal. And the other option, we outmaneuver them. Let them think they're winning, right up until they've already lost. It requires patience, strategy, and a willingness to let them keep hurting you in small ways while we prepare the killing blow." Leonard's voice dropped. "It's the option that requires you to be a judge, not a mother. To think strategically rather than emotionally. Can you do that? Could I?" Every instinct screamed to confront Marcus, to demand answers, to make him look me in the eye and explain how he could do this. The mother in me wanted to believe there was still time for redemption, for him to pull back from this precipice, but the judge in me knew better. I'd seen too many defendants cry and apologize and swear they'd changed, only to reoffend the moment they thought they could get away with it. Remorse without consequences was just practice for the next crime. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Leonard smiled, grim but satisfied. "Now we're talking. First, you keep drinking the tea." "What?" "They're drugging you with sleeping pills, right? Probably something mildambine, maybe lunesta. Enough to make you foggy, but not enough to be obviously incapacitated. If you suddenly stop drinking the tea, they'll know something's changed. They'll accelerate their timeline or change tactics. We need them confident, complacent, convinced their plan is working. You want me to keep letting them drug me?" "No. I want you to pretend to keep drinking the tea. Pour it down the sink when they're not looking. Complain about how you can't sleep, how you're feeling confused. Play into their narrative. Let them think the sleeping pills are working." Meanwhile, he pulled out a card, slid it across the desk. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen. She's a neurologist, top of her field. And more importantly, she's my goddaughter. She owes me several favors. I want you to see her, get a complete cognitive assessment, the real kind. We'll establish that you're completely competent, get it documented and notarized." I took the card, and then we start moving assets. Not all of them, nothing so dramatic that it triggers alarm bells, but gradually, quietly, We start restructuring your holdings in ways that make it impossible for them to access even if they get conservatorship, irrevocable trusts, offshore accounts, if necessary, foundation grants that can't be reversed. Leonard was writing rapidly now, his lawyer brain cataloging strategies. Charles, set up the company structure to give you control. We're going to make that control nuclear-proof. What about Carter Holdings? Marcus works there. He has access to nothing important, as of 10 minutes ago. Leonard checked his watch. I have a colleague executing paperwork right now that changes the corporate access levels. Marcus will still have his VP title, his office, his salary, but his actual power within the company gets quietly downgraded. By Monday, he won't be able to authorize anything more significant than ordering office supplies. He'll notice, eventually, but by then, it'll be too late. Leonard leaned back, his expression calculating. Here's what happens next, Evelyn. You go home. You act confused. You drink the tea or pretend to. You miss appointments. You get flustered at dinner. You play the role they've written for you, Oscar-worthy performance, because you need them to believe it's working. Meanwhile, we're doing the real work behind the scenes. For how long? The cognitive assessment with Dr. Whitmore is next Thursday. That gives us 6 days. In those 6 days, we need to see Dr. Chen, restructure your assets, change all your passwords and account access. And most importantly, he paused, making sure I was listening. Most importantly, we need to set up your exit strategy. My exit strategy. You can't stay in that house, Evelyn. Even if we block the conservatorship, even if we protect your assets, you're living with people who are actively trying to destroy you. That's not sustainable. That's not safe. He was right, of course, but the thought of leaving my home, the house Charles and I had chosen together, the rooms where I'd raised my children and celebrated anniversaries and built a life, it felt like another death, another loss in a year that had already taken so much. Where would I go? I have a property, a townhouse in Virginia Highland, fully furnished, currently vacant. It's in a trust that's not connected to my name publicly. You can stay there as long as you need, completely off their radar. Leonard's voice softened. I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes tactical retreat is the smartest move. I thought about chess, about how Charles used to play. He'd taught me that the most powerful piece on the board wasn't the queen, despite her range and flexibility. It was the king, because the king's survival was the only thing that mattered. Everything else, every sacrifice, every gambit, every calculated loss was in service of keeping the king alive and in play. Right now, I needed to be the king, not the most powerful piece, but the one that survived. Okay, I said, tell me exactly what I need to do. Over the next 2 hours, Leonard laid out the plan with military precision. I'd see Dr. Chen on Saturday morning. Tell them you're visiting a friend. Keep it vague. I'd meet with his financial advisors on Sunday brunch, with old colleagues from the bench, Monday and Tuesday. I'd work with his paralegals to sign documents, restructuring the trusts, volunteer work at the legal aid clinic. Every lie had a cover story. Every meeting had an alibi. What about Naomi? I asked. She needs to know. Leonard hesitated. Does she? Because if she knows and changes her behavior, Marcus and Vanessa might notice. They're watching you closely. Are they watching her too? She's at Howard. They barely talk to her, except to pump her for information about what I'm saying. Then maybe Naomi is our ace in the hole, the one person they're not worried about, which means she can move freely. Leonard made a note. Can you get a message to her? Something that wouldn't seem suspicious. I thought about it. I could ask her to come home for the weekend. Say I'm feeling lonely, want family around. They'd expect that. Perfect. Get her here. Brief her in person where there's no chance of them overhearing. She studies law, right? She'll understand the strategy. Leonard looked at me seriously. Evelyn, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do, it's legal. It's justified. And it's necessary. But it's also going to hurt. Watching your son realize he's lost. Watching him understand you outplayed him, that's going to be brutal. Are you prepared for that? Was I? I thought about Marcus as a baby. The way he'd grip my finger with his tiny fist. Marcus at 7, crying when he fell off his bike, trusting me to make it better. Marcus at 16, cocky and rebellious, but still fundamentally mine. Marcus at 25, at his father's side, trying so hard to earn approval he never quite received. When had that boy become this man? When had ambition curdled into betrayal? Or had the seeds always been there, waiting for the right conditions to bloom into something poisonous? I don't have a choice, I said finally. He made his choice when he decided to drug me, when he conspired to have me declared incompetent, when he started treating my life like an obstacle between him and money. I met Leonard's eyes. I'm not doing this to hurt him. I'm doing this to survive him. Good. Hold on to that. You're going to need it. I left Leonard's office through the back entrance, feeling both lighter and heavier than when I'd arrived. Lighter because I had a plan, a strategy, a way forward. Heavier because that way forward meant accepting that my son, my firstborn, my baby, was truly lost to me. The Uber driver was chattier than the morning one, asking about my day, commenting on the weather. I gave vague responses, my mind already racing ahead. 6 days, that's all I had to pull off the performance of my lifetime, to convince Marcus and Vanessa. Their plan was working while systematically dismantling every advantage they thought they had. 6 days to save my life from the child I'd given life to. When I got home, Vanessa was in the kitchen, preparing lunch. She looked up when I entered, her expression perfectly calibrated between concern and welcome. There you are, Mom. We were getting worried. Where did you go? Just out for a drive, I said, making my voice slightly vague, like I was struggling to remember. Needed some air. Ended up at that park, the one with the ... I trailed off, as if the word wouldn't come. The duck pond, Vanessa supplied helpfully, moving closer. Piedmont Park, yes, that one. I rubbed my forehead. I'm sorry. My memory's been so foggy lately. Don't apologize. She touched my arm, and it took everything in me not to flinch. That's what we're here for, to help you through this difficult time. Now, why don't you sit down? I'll make you some tea. Tea, of course. That would be lovely, I said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. You're so thoughtful, Vanessa. She smiled, and I smiled back. And anyone watching would have seen two women who cared for each other, family bound by love and concern. They wouldn't have seen the war being waged beneath the surface, the silent calculation of two chess players studying the board, each convinced they knew how the game would end. But only one of us was right. The next 6 days were a masterclass in deception, and I discovered I was better at it than I'd ever imagined. Saturday morning, I told them I was visiting Helen Crawford, an old colleague from the bench who'd retired to a lake house in Roswell. She's been asking me to visit for months, I said over breakfast, making my voice bright but slightly scattered. Or was it weeks? I can't remember. Anyway, I promised I'd come. That's wonderful, Mom, Marcus said, but I caught the glance he exchanged with Vanessa, a look that said, good, let her go play with her old lady friends while we handle real business. Instead, I met Dr. Sarah Chen at her private clinic in Midtown. Dr. Chen was younger than I expected, early 40s, with kind eyes and an efficiency that reminded me of myself at that age. Leonard had briefed her, but she still spent 2 hours putting me through every cognitive test known to neurology: memory recall, pattern recognition, problem solving, executive function. She tested my ability to draw clocks, name objects, count backwards from 100 by sevens. Mrs. Carter, she said when we finished, pulling off her glasses and smiling, your cognitive function is exceptional, better than most people 20 years younger. If anything, your scores suggest hypervigilance. Your brain is working overtime, probably due to stress and threat assessment, but there's zero indication of dementia, Alzheimer's, or any cognitive decline whatsoever. Can you document that? Already am. I'll have a complete report ready by Monday, notarized and filed. If anyone tries to claim you're incompetent, this report will demolish them. She hesitated. Leonard told me what's happening. I'm sorry you're going through this. Don't be sorry. Just be thorough. Sunday I had brunch with the girls, retired judges, supposedly reminiscing about old cases. I actually spent 4 hours in a conference room with Leonard's financial team, signing papers that restructured my entire financial life. Assets moved into irrevocable trusts, with Naomi as the beneficiary. The Carter Holdings shares got placed in a foundation with a board that Marcus couldn't touch. My personal accounts were closed and reopened at different banks, under different terms. What about the house? I asked. The lead advisor, a sharp woman named Patricia, pulled up a document. The house is tricky because it's a marital asset, but we've structured it so that any sale would require Naomi's signature as co-trustee. Basically, Marcus can't force you out or sell it without her agreement, and she won't agree. Not if she understands what's at stake. Which brought me to Monday evening, when Naomi came home for what I'd call the family dinner. She'd driven down from D.C., and when she walked through the door, the relief on her face told me she'd been as worried as I'd been. Mama, she said, hugging me tight, and I felt her whisper against my ear, "Are you okay?" I squeezed back. Later, dinner was excruciating. Vanessa had made pot roast, Charles's favorite. Though he wasn't there to eat it, and Marcus held forth about company business like he was already CEO. He talked about the West Side development, about expansion opportunities, about bringing Carter Holdings into the modern age. Dad was brilliant, he said, sawing into his meat with unnecessary force, but his strategies were dated. Conservative, we're leaving money on the table. Your father built a company on integrity, I said quietly. That's not dated. That's timeless. Sure, Mom. But integrity doesn't pay the bills. He laughed, like he'd made a joke, but there was an edge to it. Sometimes you have to be willing to take risks, push boundaries. Dad never understood that. Naomi set down her fork with a clink that sounded like a gavel. Daddy understood plenty. He understood that cutting corners catches up with you, that reputation takes decades to build and seconds to destroy. That's why he left the company to Mama Bafka. She understands that too. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Marcus's jaw tightened. Naomi, you're 22. You don't know the first thing about running a business. I know about character, about ethics, about not drugging your own mother, and plotting to have her declared incompetent so you can steal her life. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Marcus's face cycle through shock, denial, then carefully constructed confusion. What are you talking about? But Naomi was looking at me, her eyes wide with horror and understanding. Mama, is it true? I should have stopped her, should have stuck to the plan, kept playing confused and pliable for 6 more days. But something in me broke open at seeing my daughter's face, at having one person in this house who was completely, undeniably on my side. Yes, I said simply, it's true. Vanessa recovered first, her composure sliding back into place like armor. This is exactly what we've been worried about. Evelyn, honey, you're confused. You've been having these paranoid episodes. I heard you, I said, looking at Marcus. Not Vanessa. She was calculating enough to recover from anything. But Marcus, my son, who'd never been good at hiding his emotions. Thursday night, 3 weeks ago, you were in the study, planning my institutionalization, discussing the sleeping pills in my tea, coordinating with Dr. Whitmore to falsify my cognitive assessment. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I watched him try to find the lie, the explanation, the justification that would make this okay. We were trying to help, he said finally. You've been struggling, Mom. The grief, the stress. We thought you needed professional care. Professional care doesn't require sleeping pills slipped into evening tea. It doesn't require conspiracy with my physician. It doesn't require filing for conservatorship so you can control my money. It's not about money. It's always about money. The words came out harder than I intended, and I saw Marcus flint. Your father left you a trust fund worth millions. He gave you a vice presidency, a career, a future. But it wasn't enough. You wanted what he gave me not because you loved the company, not because you're qualified to run it, but because you think you deserve it more than I do. He should have left it to me. Marcus's voice was raw now, the careful facade cracking. I'm his son, his heir. You're just you were just his wife. Just his wife. As if 35 years of partnership, of building a life, and raising children, and supporting every dream, meant nothing. As if I was an accessory to Charles's life rather than half of its foundation. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, get out of my house, both of you, tonight. Vanessa stood smoothly, her hand on Marcus's shoulder. Let's not be hasty. We can discuss this like adults. I said get out. My voice was steel now, the voice that had cleared courtrooms and made lawyers tremble. You have 2 hours to pack your things and leave. If you're still here after that, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. This is my house too. Marcus stood, knocking his chair back. Dad left me. Dad left you nothing concerning this house. I checked. It's mine, titled solely in my name as of 1995 when we refinanced. You have no legal claim to be here, and you've overstayed your welcome by about 3 months. I pulled out my phone. Would you like me to call the police now, or will you go peacefully? I watched my son make calculations, watched him realize he'd overplayed his hand too early, revealed his strategy before the board was set. Vanessa was already moving, always the smarter one, already planning the next move. We'll go, she said smoothly. But Marcus is right here. Not well, Evelyn. This paranoia, these accusations, they're symptoms. We'll be consulting with Dr. Whitmore about immediate intervention. Feel free. He'll be hard to reach though. since I fired him this morning and filed a formal complaint with the medical board about his willingness to falsify patient assessments. That landed. I saw Vanessa's mask slip, just for a second, saw the fury beneath the polish. They left within 90 minutes. I stood at the window and watched Marcus load boxes into his Mercedes, watched Vanessa supervise with the air of someone planning a military retreat rather than defeat. Before they drove away, Marcus looked back at the house at me. Standing in the window end, the expression on his face was pure hatred. My son hated me. The boy I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through sleepless nights, loved with every fiber of my being, looked at me like I was his enemy. I turned away from the window before he could see me cry. Naomi found me there an hour later, still standing in the dark living room, tears streaming down my face in silence. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around me and held on while I shattered. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. Don't be. You saved me. If you hadn't confronted them, I was going to keep playing the game, keep pretending. I don't know if I could have kept it up. What happens now? Good question." The plan had been to let them think they were winning, to systematically protect my assets while appearing vulnerable, to wait until the perfect moment to reveal the trap. Instead, I'd sprung it early, driven by emotion rather than strategy, and now they knew I was onto them. Now they'd be desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. "Now," I said, pulling back and wiping my eyes, "I need to disappear." Naomi's eyes widened. "What? They'll come back. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but they'll come back with lawyers, with doctors, with some new strategy. As long as I'm here, I'm a target. But if I'm Ganif, they can't find me, they can't hurt me. Where will you go?" "Leonard has a place, somewhere they won't think to look." "But Naomi," I gripped her shoulders, "I need you to stay, to be my eyes and ears, to make sure they don't try to forge documents, or manipulate the board, or pull some legal maneuver I haven't anticipated. You want me to spy on my own brother? I want you to protect your mother. Can you do that?" She nodded, and I saw myself in her face, that same determination, that same steel spine that had carried me through 25 years of difficult verdicts and impossible cases. We spent the rest of the night planning. I packed a single suitcase enough for a few weeks, nothing that would suggest permanence. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, Charles's wedding ring that I wore on a chain around my neck. The important documents were already with Leonard, the money already moved, the assets already protected. At 3 in the morning, I took one last walk through the house, the living room where we'd hosted Christmas dinners and birthday parties, the kitchen where Charles had learned to make terrible pancakes every Sunday morning, the bedroom where we'd laughed and fought and made love and made plans for a future that would never come. "I'll come back," I promised the empty rooms. "This is my home. I'll come back." But first, I had to disappear. Leonard picked me up at dawn, before the neighbors were awake, before anyone would see. I left a note for Naomi on the kitchen counter. "Gone to clear my head. Don't worry. I love you." As we drove away, I watched my house recede in the rearview mirror, getting smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. Judge Evelyn Carter had left the building, and she was taking everything with her. The townhouse in Virginia Highland was nothing like my home in Buckhead, where my house was sprawling and stately. This was compact and modern, where my house held 35 years of memories embedded in every wall. This was anonymous, decorated with the bland taste of someone who'd never lived there, who'd chosen furniture for function rather than meaning. It was perfect. For the first 3 days, I did nothing but sleep, real sleep, without the fog of sleeping pills or the anxiety of listening for footsteps outside my door. I slept 12, 14, 16 hours at a time, my body finally releasing the tension it had been holding for months. When I was awake, I sat by the window with coffee and watched the neighborhood young families, joggers, dog walkers, people living normal lives that didn't involve their children plotting against them. Naomi called twice a day with updates. Marcus had returned to the house the day after I left, pounding on the door, demanding entry. She'd called the police side, added her to the deed as part of the asset restructuring, giving her legal standing to deny him access. "He lost it, Mama," she told me, her voice shaking. "Started yelling about how you'd poisoned me against him, how I was choosing you over family. The police made him leave, but he sat in his car outside for 3 hours." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but Vanessa did. She called me later, all smooth and reasonable, saying I was making a terrible mistake, that Marcus was going to do what's necessary to protect the family legacy, that I should remember who I was loyal to. And what did you say? I told her I was loyal to the person who'd never tried to drug me and steal my inheritance. A pause. She hung up. On the fourth day, Leonard came by with news. Marcus filed for emergency conservatorship this morning. Claims you've had a mental breakdown, that you've disappeared and may be a danger to yourself. He's got Dr. Whitmore's statement, apparently filed it before you could get him suspended. Can he do that? File the statement after I've complained about him? He can file it. Whether a judge will accept it is another question, especially once they see Dr. Chun's evaluation. Leonard set down his briefcase. But here's the problem, Evelyn. You're not in court. You didn't respond to service because they can't find you to serve you. That gives Marcus's lawyers ammunition. They'll claim you're mentally unstable and evading legal proceedings. So I should come back, face them in court. Eventually, but not yet. Right now, let them panic. Let them wonder where you are, what you're doing, what kind of evidence you might be gathering. Leonard smiled grimly. Fear makes people sloppy, and Marcus has always been sloppy when he's scared. He was right. Over the next week, Naomi reported increasingly frantic behavior. Marcus had showed up at Carter Holdings, trying to exercise authority he no longer had. When the board secretary politely informed him that his access had been restricted, he'd caused a scene yelling about his father's legacy, about being betrayed by his own family, about how everyone would regret this. The board had called an emergency meeting. Without me there to lead it, they'd elected an interim chairman, Theodore Banks, Charles's oldest business partner, a man who'd known Marcus since he was in diapers and had never been impressed. Theodore called me, Leonard reported, said Marcus tried to present himself as your proxy, claimed you were incapacitated and he was acting in your interests. Theodore asked for documentation. Marcus couldn't provide any. The conservatorship hasn't been granted yet. So Theodore told him to leave and suggested he get a good lawyer because the board was considering a vote to remove him as VP. Can they do that? Charles structured the company to prevent nepotism from destroying it. Board members can be removed for cause by majority vote, and causing a scene, claiming false authority, and trying to manipulate corporate governance definitely qualifies as cause. I should have felt victorious. Marcus was imploding, his own behavior undermining whatever sympathy he might have garnered, but all I felt was hollow. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, destroying himself because he couldn't let go of entitlement and greed. There's something else, Leonard said carefully. Marcus has hired Jonathan Steele. I felt my stomach drop. Jonathan Steele was one of the best and most ruthless lawyers in Atlanta. He specialized in conservatorships and estate battles, had a reputation for winning at any cost. Ethics be damned. That's Vanessa's doing, I said. Marcus doesn't know lawyers like that. Agreed, which means she's escalating. Steele doesn't come cheap, and he doesn't take cases he doesn't think he can win. He must believe Marcus has something. Like what? Leonard pulled out a folder. They've been busy. Affidavits from 3 of your neighbors claiming you've seemed confused and disoriented in recent months. A statement from your housekeeper. Did you know you still had a housekeeper? Rosa. She comes twice a week. I haven't seen her since I stopped. Since Marcus and Vanessa moved in, they've been meeting with her without me knowing, apparently, and she's claiming you fired her 3 times but forgot each time, that you accused her of stealing things that were never missing, that you left the stove on twice and nearly started fires. That's all lies. I know, but Steele is building a narrative. Confused widow, declining mental state, family members trying to help, but being pushed away by paranoid delusions. If he can get enough people to testify to a pattern of behavior, a judge might grant a temporary conservatorship pending full evaluation. So what do? You come back, but on your terms, not theirs. Leonard leaned forward. We schedule a formal hearing. We present Dr. Chen's evaluation. The evidence of the sleeping pills we had that tea tested, by the way, and it contained enough zolpidem to tranquilize a horse. We present the financial irregularities, the credit cards opened in your name, the systematic isolation. We don't just defend against the conservatorship, we go on offense. Criminal charges, if we can make them stick. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, maybe even attempted kidnapping depending on how the nursing home angle plays. At minimum, we get restrained. The townhouse in Virginia Highland was nothing like my home in Buckhead. Where my house was sprawling and stately, this was compact and modern. Where my house held 35 years of memories embedded in every wall, this was anonymous, decorated with the bland taste of someone who'd never lived there, who'd chosen furniture for function rather than meaning. It was perfect. For the first 3 days, I did nothing but sleep. Real sleep, without the fog of sleeping pills or the anxiety of listening for footsteps outside my door. I slept 12, 14, 16 hours at a time, my body finally releasing the tension it had been holding for months. When I was awake, I sat by the window with coffee and watched the neighborhood young families, joggers, dog walkers, people living normal lives that didn't involve their children plotting against them. Naomi called twice a day with updates. Marcus had returned to the house the day after I left, pounding on the door, demanding entry. She'd called the police side, added her to the deed as part of the asset restructuring, giving her legal standing to deny him access. He lost it, Mama, she told me, her voice shaking. Started yelling about how you'd poisoned me against him, how I was choosing you over family. The police made him leave, but he sat in his car outside for 3 hours. Did he threaten you? Not directly, but Vanessa did. She called me later, all smooth and reasonable, saying I was making a terrible mistake, that Marcus was going to do what's necessary to protect the family legacy, that I should remember who I was loyal to. And what did you say? I told her I was loyal to the person who'd never tried to drug me and steal my inheritance. A pause. She hung up. On the 4th day, Leonard came by with news. Marcus filed for emergency conservatorship this morning. Claims you've had a mental breakdown, that you've disappeared and may be a danger to yourself. He's got Dr. Whitmore's statement, apparently filed it before you could get him suspended. Can he do that? File the statement after I've complained about him? He can file it. Whether a judge will accept it is another question, especially once they see Dr. Chun's evaluation. Leonard set down his briefcase. But here's the problem, Evelyn. You're not in court. You didn't respond to service because they can't find you to serve you. That gives Marcus's lawyers ammunition. They'll claim you're mentally unstable and evading legal proceedings. So I should come back, face them in court. Eventually, but not yet. Right now, let them panic. Let them wonder where you are, what you're doing, what kind of evidence you might be gathering. Leonard smiled grimly. Fear makes people sloppy, and Marcus has always been sloppy when he's scared. He was right. Over the next week, Naomi reported increasingly frantic behavior. Marcus had showed up at Carter Holdings, trying to exercise authority he no longer had. When the board secretary politely informed him that his access had been restricted, he'd caused a scene yelling about his father's legacy, about being betrayed by his own family, about how everyone would regret this. The board had called an emergency meeting. Without me there to lead it, they'd elected an interim chairman, Theodore Banks, Charles's oldest business partner, a man who'd known Marcus since he was in diapers and had never been impressed. Theodore called me. I've got them, Mama, she said the night before the hearing, her eyes fierce. They tried to use me against you, kept asking what you were saying, where you might be. I played along, acted like I was conflicted, like maybe they were right about you being unstable, and they ate it up. Vanessa got careless, said things on the phone she never should have said. Like what? Naomi played a recording. Vanessa's voice, smooth and confident. Once we get conservatorship, we can liquidate everything. The house, the company shares, all of it. Marcus will finally have what he deserves, and that self-righteous bitch will rot in whatever care facility takes her. That self-righteous bitch, said with such venom, such pure hatred. I'd never done anything to Vanessa except exist, except be the obstacle between her husband and money. That's admissible. I asked Leonard. Georgia's a one-party consent state for recordings. Naomi was part of the conversation. It's admissible, he smiled, and it's devastating. Proves this was never about your welfare, was always about money. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, not from the sleeping pills this time, but from anticipation, from fear, from the knowledge that tomorrow everything would be decided. Tomorrow I'd face my son in a courtroom, and one of us would walk away victorious while the other lost everything. I stood at the window of the townhouse, looking out at the quiet street, and thought about Charles. What would he say if he could see us now? Would he be proud of how I'd fought back, ashamed that our family had come to this, heartbroken that the son he'd loved had become this person? I miss you, I whispered to the darkness. I miss you so damn much, and I'm sorry I couldn't save him. I'm sorry I couldn't make Marcus into the man you hoped he'd be. But Charles wasn't there to answer. He'd left me with this burden, this impossible choice, and I had to face it alone. Tomorrow, I'd walk back into my life, and I'd take it back from the people who'd tried to steal it. The Fulton County Courthouse looked exactly as I remembered it, imposing red brick and white columns, the kind of architecture designed to make you feel the weight of justice before you even walked through the doors. I'd entered this building hundreds of times as a judge, always through the private entrance, always with the authority of the bench behind me. Today, I walked through the front doors like everyone else, like a plaintiff, like someone who had to prove she deserved her own life. Leonard met me in the lobby, looking sharp in his courtroom suit, the expensive one he saved for cases that mattered. Behind him were his associates, Dr. Chen, Theodore Banks, and Naomi, who'd driven down from Howard at dawn. My daughter looked older somehow, like the past month had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. You ready? Leonard asked. I adjusted my silver braids, worn down today, deliberate, because I wanted the judge to see me as I was, a 62-year-old black woman who'd earned every one of these gray hairs and wasn't about to let anyone make her ashamed of them. I've been ready for 30 years, I said. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I'd presided over. This was family court. Technically, though, there was nothing familial about what we were about to do. Judge Patricia Morrison presided. I knew her vaguely. A sharp woman, about 10 years younger than me, known for her impatience with bullshit and her commitment to evidence over emotion. Good. That's exactly what I needed. Marcus was already seated at the plaintiff's table with Jonathan Steele beside him. My son looked terrible, thinner than he'd been a month ago, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. His eyes were red-rimmed, and when he looked at me, I saw something I hadn't expected. Genuine anguish. Not guilt, not remorse, but the pain of someone who believed he was the victim in this story. Vanessa sat in the gallery behind him, perfectly composed, perfectly still. She met my eyes without flinching, and I saw the calculation there, already planning the next move, already adjusting strategy now that I'd returned. Judge Morrison called the court to order, and Jonathan Steele stood to make his opening statement. He was good. I had to give him that. Smooth, sympathetic, painting a picture of a grieving widow who'd lost her anchor and was now adrift in confusion and paranoia. Your Honor, we're here today because a family is trying to save their mother from herself. Mrs. Carter has, by all accounts, been a remarkable woman, a distinguished judge, a devoted wife, a loving mother, but the death of her husband has triggered a decline that her family can no longer ignore. Steele gestured to a folder thick with documents. We have testimony from medical professionals, from neighbors, from household staff, all documenting a pattern of confusion, memory loss, and paranoid behavior. Mrs. Carter has accused her own son, her devoted, loving son, of conspiracy, of drugging her, of trying to steal from her. These are not the words of a woman thinking clearly. These are the delusions of someone who needs help. He went on, and I watched Marcus nodding along, maybe even believing it himself now. That's the thing about lies, told often enough. Eventually even the liar starts to forget what's true. When Steele finished, Leonard stood. He didn't approach the bench with flourish or drama. He simply stood there, holding a single folder, and waited until he had everyone's complete attention. Your Honor, over the next few hours, we're going to present evidence that will prove beyond any doubt that Mrs. Carter is completely competent, that she has been the victim of a systematic campaign of fraud and manipulation by her son and daughter, and that this conservatorship petition is nothing more than an attempted theft disguised as concern. He opened the folder. We're going to show you forged credit applications. We're going to show you sleeping pills added to evening tea. We're going to show you a conspiracy to have a physician falsify medical records. And when we're done, Your Honor, I believe you'll agree that the only people who need supervision in this courtroom are sitting at the plaintiff's table. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Morrison. Yes, Your Honor. Which is why we have serious evidence. The first witness was Dr. Chen. She took the stand with the confidence of someone who knew her expertise was unimpeachable, and she methodically destroyed Dr. Whitmore's assessment. She walked Judge Morrison through my cognitive tests, the perfect scores, the above-average processing speed, the memory recall that would make a 30-year-old jealous. In my professional opinion, Dr. Chen concluded, Mrs. Carter shows no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever. If anything, her mental acuity is remarkable for her age. Steele tried to shake her on cross-examination, suggesting she was biased because Leonard was her godfather. Dr. Chen smiled thinly. Mr. Steele, I've staked my professional reputation on my assessments for 20 years. I don't falsify reports for anyone, family or otherwise. Can Dr. Whitmore say the same? Objection sustained, Judge Morrison said, but she was looking at Steele with new skepticism. Let's move on. Next came the tea. Leonard presented the lab results opium, in concentrations consistent with a full sleeping pill dissolved in liquid. administered nightly over a period of weeks. The toxicologist testified that this level of dosing would absolutely cause confusion, memory problems, and disorientation. Is there any legitimate medical reason to give someone sleeping medication without their knowledge? Leonard asked. No, that would be considered poisoning. Marcus shifted in his seat. I watched color drain from his face as he realized how this looked not like concerned family, but like criminals. Rosa testified next, and she was devastating. She told the truth about the affidavit Marcus and Vanessa had paid her to sign, about the lies they'd coached her to tell, about the guilt that had been eating her alive. I needed the money, she said, tears streaming down her face, but I never should have lied about Mrs. Carter. She was always good to me, always kind, and I betrayed her. No further questions, Leonard said gently. Steele's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint Rosa as a money-grubbing liar who'd say anything for cash, but it backfired, because if Rosa was lying for money before, then Marcus's case was built on purchase testimony, and if she was telling the truth now, then Marcus was the liar. Either way, his credibility was demolished. Theodore Banks testified about Marcus's behavior at Carter Holdings, the attempts to seize authority, the scene he'd caused. Charles Carter built that company on integrity, Theodore said, his voice firm. His son seems determined to tear it down through entitlement. Then came the peace. Thou resistance, Naomi. My daughter took the stand, looking small but fierce, and when Leonard asked her to describe what she'd witnessed, she didn't hold back. She told Judge Morrison everything, the whispered conversations, the forged documents, the systematic isolation of me in my own home. My brother moved in claiming he wanted to help our mother, Naomi said, but from the first day, he was treating her like an obstacle, like someone in his way. Did you ever hear him discuss plans for your mother's future? Leonard asked. Yes, I recorded one conversation. Naomi pulled out her phone. May I play it for the court? Judge Morrison nodded. And suddenly, the courtroom was filled with Vanessa's voice. Once we get conservatorship, we can liquidate everything. The house, the company shares, all of it. Marcus will finally have what he deserves, and that self-righteous bitch will rot in whatever care facility takes her. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Marcus's face crumble, watched him turn to look at Vanessa with something like horror. Had he not known she'd said that? Had he somehow convinced himself this was about my welfare rather than money? Steele tried to recover. Your Honor, that recording is taken out of context, Mr. Steele. Judge Morrison interrupted. I'm a family court judge. I've heard every excuse, every justification, every attempt to explain away the inexcusable. That recording has exactly one context: greed. Are you seriously going to try to tell me otherwise? Steele sat down. Mr. Morrison, do you have any other witnesses? Just one, Your Honor. I'd like to call Evelyn Carter. I stood and walked to the witness stand, and it felt surreal being on this side of the courtroom, swearing to tell the truth when I'd spent decades evaluating others' truth-telling. I settled into the chair and looked directly at Judge Morrison, refusing to look at Marcus because if I did, I'd lose my composure. Leonard walked me through everything: the months after Charles's death, Marcus and Vanessa moving in, the small changes that became large invasions, the missing wedding ring, the shifted documents, the sleeping pills in my tea, the overheard conversation that revealed their true intentions. How did you feel when you heard your son planning your institutionalization? Leonard asked. I finally looked at Marcus then, really looked at him. Betrayed, I said simply, heartbroken, and furious, because I realized my son didn't see me as a person anymore, just as an obstacle between him and money he felt entitled to. Do you love your son, Mrs. Carter? I do, I always will, but I won't let that love destroy me. Steele's cross-examination was aggressive. He tried to paint me as vindictive, as overreacting to normal family concern. He brought up my retirement from the bench. Isn't it true you retired early due to stress? I retired at 60 to spend time with my husband before he died. I wish I'd retired earlier. Isn't it possible you misunderstood your son's intentions? Mr. Steele, I spent 25 years evaluating evidence and determining intent. When someone drugs you and plans your institutionalization while discussing how to liquidate your assets, the intent is crystal clear. He tried several more angles, but I'd been cross-examined by better lawyers than him. I kept my answers short, factual.com, never defensive, never emotional, just the facts, delivered with the authority of someone who'd spent her career dealing with exactly this kind of manipulation. When I stepped down, Leonard rested his case. Judge Morrison took a 15-minute recess. When she returned, her expression was set in stone. "I've heard enough," she said. "Mr. Carter, stand up, please." Marcus stood, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "Mr. Carter, I want you to understand something. This court exists to protect vulnerable people from exploitation, but Mrs. Carter is not vulnerable. She's sharp, competent, and frankly more mentally acute than half the lawyers who practice in my courtroom. What she is the victim of a scheme by her own family to rob her of her autonomy, her assets, and her dignity." Judge Morrison's voice hardened. "Your petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing you from contacting Mrs. Carter or coming within 500 feet of her residence. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of possible criminal charges, including fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." Marcus swayed like he'd been hit. Vanessa's face remained impassive, but I saw her hand tighten on the gallery rail. "Your Honor," Steele began. "I'm not finished. Mrs. Carter, you have the right to file civil charges for damages. I strongly suggest you do so. This court stands adjourned." The gavel fell with a sound like thunder. I stood, and Naomi was there immediately, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. Leonard was smiling. Theodore was shaking my hand. Dr. Chen was saying something about justice. But I was watching Marcus, watching him stand at the plaintiff's table, alone. Now Vanessa had already slipped out, probably already planning her exit strategy. He looked across the courtroom at me, and for just a moment, I saw my little boy, the one who'd been afraid of the dark, the one who'd needed me. Then he turned and walked away, and I let him go. The house felt different when I returned. Same walls, same furniture, same photographs of Charles smiling from frames scattered throughout the rooms, but the air had changed somehow, like a storm had passed through and left everything cleaner, quieter, more mine. Naomi helped me unpack the single suitcase I'd lived out of for 3 weeks. We worked in comfortable silence, putting clothes back in drawers, hanging dresses in the closet, restoring order to a life that had been thrown into chaos. "You're really back," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed, the bed I'd shared with Charles, the bed I'd slept in alone for months while my son plotted my downfall 2 doors away. "I'm really back." "What now?" Good question. The restraining order meant Marcus couldn't come near me, but it didn't erase him from existence. He was still out there somewhere, still my son, still carrying whatever hatred or hurt or justification had led him to this place. "Now," I said, folding the last sweater, "we rebuild." The next morning, I drove to Carter Holdings for the first time since before Charles died. The building rose against the Atlanta skyline, like a monument to everything my husband had built. 35 years of integrity, hard work, and vision condensed into steel and glass. The receptionist's eyes widened when I walked in. "Mrs. Carter, we weren't expecting, I know. Is the board assembled?" "They're in the conference room," but I walked past her, heels clicking on marble floors, moving with the same authority I'd carried in the courthouse 3 days ago. The conference room doors were closed, voices murmuring behind them. I didn't knock. I opened the doors and walked in. 10 faces turned toward meet the Carter Holdings Board of Directors, mid-discussion about quarterly projections or market analyses or whatever they'd been managing in my absence. Theodore Banks sat at the head of the table, in what had been Charles's chair, what should have been my chair. "Evelyn," he said, standing immediately, "we didn't know you were coming. I should have been here months ago. I'm sorry I left you to handle things alone. You had your own battles to fight." Theodore gestured to the chair at his right. "Please, join us." I didn't sit in the offered chair. I walked to the head of the table, where Theodore stood, and I met his eyes. He understood immediately. This wasn't a courtesy visit or a board member checking in. This was a return. "Your seat, Mrs. Carter," he said, moving aside with a slight smile. I sat in Charles's chair. My Chairand looked at the faces around the table. Some I knew well, Charles's old friends and trusted advisors. Others were newer, brought on after his death, looking uncertain about what my presence meant for their positions. "I owe you all an apology," I said. "When Charles died, I should have stepped up immediately to lead this company. Instead, I grieved, I retreated, and I let my personal crisis become your professional uncertainty. That ends today. Evelyn, no one blames you," Theodore began. "I blame me. Charles trusted me with his life's work, and I nearly let it be destroyed by someone who saw it as an inheritance rather than a responsibility." I pulled out a folder, the one Leonard had prepared. outlining the restructuring plans. Here's what's going to happen. I'm formally assuming the role of CEO, effective immediately. Theodore, I want you as you've been running things anyway, and you're damn good at it. We're going to conduct a full audit of all decisions made in the past 6 months, particularly any involving my son. Anything that compromises this company's integrity gets reversed, regardless of cost. Marcus made some aggressive moves on the West Side development, one board member said carefully, cutting corners on environmental reviews, pushing through permits that reverse it, all of it. I don't care if it costs us millions. This company was built on doing things right, not doing things fast. I looked around the table. Charles used to say that reputation is the only asset you can't buy back once you've sold it. We're not selling ours, not for profit, not for growth, not for anything. Over the next 2 hours, we went through everything. The West Side development got put on hold pending proper environmental review. 3 contracts Marcus had signed without proper vetting got cancelled, with apologies and penalty payments to the affected parties. A partnership with a development firm known for predatory practices got dissolved immediately. It was expensive, it was painful, but it was necessary. There's one more thing, I said as the meeting wound down. Marcus Carter is no longer employed by Carter Holdings in any capacity. His VP title is revoked, his access is terminated, and he receives no further compensation beyond what his employment contract legally requires. Are there any objections? Silence. Then Theodore spoke. Evelyn, he's your son. Are you sure? He stopped being my son when he tried to destroy me. Now he's just someone who worked here and failed. This company moves forward without him. We clear? Nods around the table. It was done. That evening, I sat in Charles's study, my study now. Truly mine, and went through the papers I'd avoided for months, his personal journals, business notes, letters he'd written but never sent. In one, dated 2 weeks before he died, I found something that made me stop breathing. Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're trying to figure out what to do about Marcus. I know our son. I know his weaknesses, his resentments, his sense of entitlement. I've seen it growing for years, and I've tried to curb it, but I've failed. That's why I'm leaving everything to you, not because I don't trust him with money, but because I don't trust him with power. Power reveals who people really are, and I'm afraid of what it would reveal in Marcus. If he comes after you when he comes after you, because I think we both know he will. Don't let your love for him destroy you. You raised him to be better than this, but at some point, people become who they choose to be regardless of how they were raised. His choices are not your failure, they're his. You were always the stronger one, Evie. I just had the louder voice. Lead the company, protect Naomi, and don't let Marcus make you doubt yourself, because that's the only way he wins. I love you, I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I'm not there to stand beside you for this fight. Always yours. Charles. I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not from sadness this time, but from relief. Charles had known, had seen the storm coming, and had trusted me to weather it, had believed in my strength even when I'd doubted it myself. The doorbell rang around 8. I wasn't expecting anyone. Naomi was at the library studying. Leonard had no appointments scheduled. I checked the security camera Charles had installed and saw Marcus standing on the porch. My son, alone, looking smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched against the autumn cold. I should have called the police. The restraining order was clear. He wasn't supposed to be here, but something in his posture, in the way he stood there, not knocking, just waiting, made me pause. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. You're violating the restraining order. I know, I needed to see you, to try to explain. There's nothing to explain. Marcus, I heard you. I heard all of it. I was angry, hurt. Dad left me nothing. He left you millions and a career. He left me responsibility. Marcus flinched. You don't understand what it was like, growing up as Charles Carter's son. Everything I did was compared to him. Every achievement was, that's good, but your father, ... Single quotes, every failure was proof I wasn't good enough. And then he died and left me nothing that mattered. He left you his name, his reputation, the opportunity to build on what he created. But you couldn't see that because you were too busy feeling entitled to what you hadn't earned. I know. His voice cracked. I know that now. I destroyed everything: my marriage, my career, my relationship with you and Naomi. Vanessa left me yesterday, said I was useless now, that she'd only stayed because I was supposed to get the money. She's filing for divorce. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. What do you want, Marcus? forgiveness, absolution, another chance to try to destroy me. I want. He stopped, tears streaming down his face. I want my mom. I want to be 7 years old again and have you fix everything and tell me it's going to be okay. My heart cracked, because that's what he was, underneath the 35-year-old man who'd tried to have me institutionalized, the frightened child who'd never learned that some things can't be fixed with mommy's love. I can't fix this, baby, I said softly. You broke something that can't be repaired, so that's it. You're just done with me. You were done with me the moment you put sleeping pills in my tea. You were done with me when you planned to lock me away and sell off my life. I'm just finally accepting what you decided months ago. I'm sorry, God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I know you are, but sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't give me back the months I spent being afraid in my own home. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that my son tried to erase me. Marcus wiped his face with shaking hands. What happens now? Now you leave. You build a life that doesn't depend on inheritance or entitlement. You figure out who you are when you're not trying to be Charles Carter's son. And maybe, someday, if you become someone worth knowing, we can talk again. And if I don't, then you don't. Your life is yours to build or destroy, Marcus, but you're not taking mine with you. He nodded slowly, accepting what I'd said even though it hurt. I do love you, Mom. Even though I tried to, even though I hurt you, I do love you. I know, but love without respect is just possession. And I won't be possessed. Not by you, not by anyone. I watched him walk back to his car, watched him sit behind the wheel for several minutes before finally driving away. Then I closed the door, locked it, and called the police to report the restraining order violation. Not out of vindictiveness, but because boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. The next morning, I announced the Evelyn and Charles Carter Foundation. $50 million, half of my liquid assets, designated for scholarships for young Black students pursuing law degrees. Every year, 20 students would receive full rides to law school, mentorship from practicing attorneys, and summer internships at top firms. Why law? The reporter asked at the press conference. Because justice is the bedrock of civilization, I said, and because I want the next generation to have every opportunity my generation had to fight, not just to protect themselves, but to protect others who can't protect themselves. Naomi stood beside me, beaming with pride, already planning to be involved in the scholarship selection process. Theodore announced that Carter Holdings would match the foundation's funding, doubling the number of students served. That evening, I walked through my house alone, every room clean, every drawer organized, every trace of Marcus and Vanessa removed. I'd had the locks changed, the security system upgraded, the house blessed by a priest from my church, who'd performed the ceremony with sage and prayers for new beginnings. I sat in Charles's favorite armchair, my favorite armchair. Noand looked at his photo on the mantel. I did it, I told him. I survived, I protected what you built, and I'm going to keep protecting it. The house was silent, but this time, the silence felt like peace rather than emptiness, the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed and the world is still again, waiting to see what grows in the aftermath. I poured myself a glass of wine, not tea, never tea again, and raised it toward Charles's photo. To justice, I said, and to moving forward. Outside, Atlanta glittered in the twilight. Somewhere out there, Marcus was figuring out his new life. Vanessa was calculating her next move. The world kept spinning, indifferent to one woman's battle for dignity and autonomy. But I'd won, not through violence or revenge or destruction, through patience, strategy, and an absolute refusal to let anyone make me smaller than I was. Judge Evelyn Carter had rendered her verdict on those who'd tried to judge her, and the verdict was, not today, not ever. Justice without mercy is cruelty, but mercy without boundaries is suicide. I'd learned to balance both. And in that balance, I'd found my way home.